the Chinese wanted and ready to have the long haul because to keep the status quo. But the problem with is in this age of identity, I'm sorry,
yes.
I borrowed
yes,
this
yes.
liberalist notion. I think has become an extreme ideology now.
Yeah, poisonous.
Essentially, it's divided the people both in the country and divided the countries in the world into us and them. This is a religion, by the way.
Yes.
Domestically, it divided, now in the United States and also in many Western countries, the immigrants from the local people and the gender division. Everything is me, my. I'm identity different from yours.
Yeah.
But it's fundamentally wrong with this approach because Confucius believed we can be at peace and friends even if we are different. This is I think we talked about as a 和而不同. We unity of differences. This is Confucianism. Western approach is unity of the sameness. If you're my type, we're friends. If you are democracies like, so we will. Otherwise, you are enemies. There's there's nothing in between.
But you
Be
know
with us or against us.
Hello, everybody. I'm back here with Dr. 𝗟𝗃. We've been talking about Russia and China in earlier, and now Dr. 𝗟𝗃 will share with us his analysis of the situation in the Pacific and China's relationship with Taiwan, with Korea, and I will also ask you later about the Philippines. But let's start with Taiwan and the peace without a peace treaty, and the fact that, let's just lay this out. I mean, everybody here, I hope you understand, we have the People's Republic of China, headquartered in Beijing, and we have the Republic of China, headquartered in Taiwan. And the political entity that governs, that has the weapons in Taiwan, the political entity is called the Republic of China. And these two have been fighting or have not been at peace with each other ever since 1949, when the People's Republic came into existence, right? 𝗟𝗃, can you tell us your analysis about why it is that we had a peace without a peace treaty and what this means for the future relationship of these two entities?
Yeah, well, you framed it in a very interesting way, the peace without the peace treaty. And this relates to China's own experience of conflict resolution, conflict management, and how to handle those conflict situation and lower the level of hostility. So I briefly mentioned the case of Taiwan and the Korean Peninsula. In both cases, I think the North and South Korea and mainland China and Taiwan are still in a state of civil war without a formal peace treaty. But ever since the 1950s, with regard to the Korean Peninsula and to Taiwan Strait since the 1970s, when U.S.-China worked out, the Taiwan issue, one China, and a peaceful unification. So these two hotspots, which used to drove those participants to hot wars, real wars, caused millions of casualties in both cases, to de-escalate, to reach the tacit agreement first, and eventually kind of de facto normalized interactions. Well, the two cases are different. North, South Korea still have no direct, economic and the transactions, human. They have some mutual visits of relatives, families, but Taiwan Strait has been becoming a strait of commerce. And every day you have hundreds of flights from each other. They're still in a state of civil war. How come has been decades of stability, peaceful development, and East Asia has become a powerhouse in a global economy. Look at the South Korea. People say, well, it's a Japanese model. It's a flying geese format in Japan, but that's only one thing. Other people say it's the United States committed so much to the region because they fought so many wars. In the first case, in the Korean War, the United States provided $3 billion to the Japanese, which is like milk for babies for the post-World War II Japan. And then the 11 years of Vietnam War, the United States actually allowed Korea, Japan to produce everything from body bags to trucks to ammunitions. So that was the beginning of the globalization, by the way. It's not because of China's joined WTO, but because of Americans. This is another way. But I think if you look at the role of Chinese approach, I think particularly the Taiwan issue, the South Korean economy started to boost from the 70s, by the way. And that was the beginning of the thawing of relationship between the mainland Taiwan. China started to reform. And so this is, but let me go to the very beginning, how the war in Korea stopped. I think it's a 3 years war from June the 25th, 1950 to the signing of the Truce Treaty in July 1953. It's a little bit more than 3 years. But the peace talks started a year after the war, began, when the battle line actually started to stabilize. There's relatively little progress by both sides. No matter how much you throw into the battlefield, there's no. So the battlefield becomes stabilized in early 1951. And then come to the moment that they start to talk. The peace, the negotiations, they call the truce negotiation, not the peace, lasts for more than 2 years. There's lots of fighting. Those military operations on both sides, but it's off and on. It lasts for more than 2 years. And finally, and lots of issues, including the POW issue and all kinds of issues. At the end of the day, when the participants supposed to sign the treaty, South Korea chose not to sign. So the 1953 Truce Treaty was signed by 3 parts: China, North Korea, and the United States. And it came into effect. The South side still want to use military power to reunify the whole Korean Peninsula. President Syngman Rhee, he wanted to fight. He believed the United States would allow him to do. And this became a typical case of the tail wag the dog. The younger brothers start to threaten, if you don't do this, I'll commit suicide, by the way. So South Korea refused to sign. Fine. United States wanted to stop fighting. Sign. You know what happened? There was a tacit collaboration between the Chinese and the US military. In that, the Chinese military launched the final campaign, military operation, only against South Korean positions, bombarded overwhelmingly, leaving the Americans intact. The Americans just watch its allies to be slaughtered because this is a collaboration between the 2 warring parties. Both wanted to have a ceasefire at this point. Of course, the United States have a new president. President Eisenhower came to power in 1953. And he actually, as a military general, he knew war kill. Unlike these days, like armchair, warriors, sitting in the office and strategy thinking about democratizing and bombing other. Eisenhower, as a commander of the European theater, the Allied forces, he knew war kill. He campaigned on the theme that if he was elected, he would have stopped the war. Military guy can be more peaceful. He was the first and the last US president to criticize the military-industrial complex.
Exactly. Eisenhower understood the dangers of militarization of your political process through like economic interference in the domestic process.
So Eisenhower was in power, and also Stalin passed away. So the Soviet leaders too could operate without the baggages of the past. And so both sides, they have change of both Russia and Soviet Union was not directly into the war, except there are some disguised pilots. They flew sorties and disguised as Chinese, but they are not declared participant. But both superpowers wanted to stop. South Korea refused to stop. The Americans just watched the Chinese, bombard, and then South Korea stopped military operations.
Which is we will see the repeat of this in Ukraine. It will be at the end of the day an agreement between Moscow and the US in order to stop the war in Ukraine. That is, I think that is clear. But I mean, the Korean example is fascinating, and maybe also if you can then say like, so we've had then a cold peace, or between the North and the South, and then we also have Taiwan and China, right? And it's funny enough that we are aware of North and South Korea, but we are not aware of North and South China, right? We are not framing that situation for reasons that we don't need to go into, but we frame it differently. So can you maybe talk about the difference with the China-Taiwan issue?
The two cases actually historically tied, connected actually. Because if you look at the outbreak of the Korean War, the day after North Korea, invaded the South, President Truman of the United States declared that the U.S. Seventh Fleet would patrol the Taiwan Strait. So before that point, the U.S. policy towards Taiwan was hands-off. This is the white paper of the U.S. State Department, Secretary of State Acheson. Watched for the dust to settle. The Chinese were ready to, send the naval ships to liberate Taiwan. Chinese sent the number 2 person to Moscow to procure naval facilities like ships and whatever. So that was before Korean War started. And but as soon as Korea started, the United States sent back 7th Fleet, effectively neutralize Chinese mainland efforts to liberate Taiwan or to take over Taiwan. So that's the two things historically related. And even go back to the end of the 19th century, I think the issue of Korea and Taiwan were created by the Japanese because Japan defeated China in 1895 and started to colonize the entire peninsula for the next 50 years until 1945. This was the beginning. At the same time, Japan also seized Taiwan. So these were the two colonies of Japan, and they were returned to China or to the Koreans. But the problem with the Korean Peninsula was Korea was divided artificially by 38th parallel. The Soviet Union took over the North, and with the anti-Japanese guerrilla leaders, Kim Il-sung, the North Korean Communist leader, he was regarded as national hero, by the way, by almost all Koreans. But once the U.S. troops landed in southern part of the Korea, led by General Rich, I think, they immediately collaborate with the Japanese collaborators, the South Korean collaborators. So that was the beginning of the current issue. You see this, the Americans ruled South Korea by using the Japanese collaborators. This is equivalent to General Eisenhower occupied Germany while hiring the Nazis. That's the equivalent. You know, among those collaborators were President Park Chung-hee.
Mm-hmm.
He became the first, later he was assassinated in the late 60s, the first modernizer of South Korea. But the Korean Peninsula, the issue could be traced all the way to Japan, for better or worse, Taiwan too. Now, how the Chinese change or redirect this kind of a conflict relationship towards more peaceful coexistence or I think in 1971, President Nixon actually wanted to open up China. So he traveled to Beijing and have an agreement with Chinese leaders. And the issue was Taiwan. So the so-called one China principle, according to the Chinese, was America recognized that both sides of Taiwan Strait, mainland Chinese and Taiwan, Kuomintang, they recognize one China. That is the precondition for normalization of relations between Washington and Beijing. Of course, it had to wait for another 8 years when Jimmy Carter was in office. But United States gradually changed its official relationship to recognize the PRC and downgrade the relationship with Taiwan as something like a unofficial status.
Yes.
So that was the arrangement. This was a kind of a convenient way. Both sides were flexible enough to handle this difficult issue without a peace treaty. So in 1979, when this is very interesting, I think we can go further with this conflict management. Ever since 1958, there was several rounds of Taiwan Strait crisis. The Chinese mainland shell those
Kinmen and Matsu.
Kinmen Matsu
islands.
in
front of Xiamen.
There are also case studies about how dramatic and how amusing actually the shelling has become. Of course, started with the bombardment on both sides, and at the beginning of the PRC, actually Taiwan, the National Forces, Air Force, been able to bomb major Chinese cities for several years. Can you believe Shanghai was bombed repeatedly by National Air Force armed with America? The Chinese was very vulnerable. So 1958 was the beginning of this massive bombing by both sides. But gradually, the mainland side actually started to lower that. I think in even before 1979, the Chinese officially proposed a peaceful unification rather than using the phrase of liberation of Taiwan. Chinese started to use peaceful unification. Even before that, the Chinese adopted a very strange and unique bombing. We bomb you every odd day. So on the even day, you can do business like on the beach and do everything, but okay. On the odd day, some shells would come. So the level of hostility has been actually managed for the sake of peaceful lives of both sides. So this is yes, we were enemies, but we can be maybe a little bit more civilized.
In our first segment, you were saying you can be at peace and have like various levels of relationship. So now we are also discovering you can be at war and have various levels.
Yes, various levels. Yeah. So there's no such thing as of course, you need to be flexible with that. You should not just like an ideological approach, good or bad. We have to win the war.
Yeah.
How could you win over a nuclear power like Russia?
Of course.
It's crazy.
I want to add, when it comes to Taiwan, one thing that this delicate relationship between the People's Republic of China and the Republic of China, and where the line is between them, is really important to understand. Kinmen and Matsu are 3 kilometers away from the Chinese mainland. I was in Kinmen, and you can literally see Xiamen on the other side of the ocean. You can literally see it. And by now, the water supply of Kinmen, part of Taiwan, comes from Xiamen, comes from the mainland. And China, whenever it gets angry, whenever Beijing gets angry, it kind of cuts off the flow of tourists, not of water, of tourists that can visit Kinmen. I mean, this relationship plays out. And on the other hand, people in Kinmen, they produce today world-class knives made of the shells that were thrown at them 50 years ago, and they proudly told us in this tour, we make these beautiful knives because the nice mainland Chinese, they gave us all of this metal, this high grade military grade metal for free.
So long live bombing.
But so it's a good thing that it's over. But this is the beginning, of course, of of turning pure hostility and killing each other into something that you can live with. I've seen this also in Ireland between the Irish and the Northern Irish. They are able now to kind of, again, laugh at something that was devastating, decades ago. And if you can start turning something horrible into something useful, then that's a kind of a peace process or peace building process. And I just wonder how to keep that going. My biggest, as long as we don't read Kinmen and Matsu in the newspapers, we know that China is not serious about any kind of military action, because these violence today would be gone immediately,
and also both sides, I mean, from Kinmen, Matsu, and the mainland, they would rather to see the transactions of commerce, tourists, and it's very normalized, and let me give you a couple of quick anecdotes. I was in Taiwan. I've been there several times. One of in the early 20s, I was in downtown Taipei and in a hotel, and suddenly there's a large crowd outside, in a public space downstairs, in the square, people waiting. These are all mainlanders, women, holding all those signs. They want their rights. They want the rights to work and live as Taiwanese, because they all married the Taiwan man. So the marriage between you has been so and it just enormous. And I remember in one dinner I had a group of us have dinner with the Taiwan's Air Force intelligence officer. I don't know why he joined us. Maybe he wanted to learn something from those academic people. And he toasted. He said, this is the best liquor, 65 proof. It's a Kinmen liquor. And I tasted it. It really tastes good. I've been there many times and enjoy my stay. But the issue with, I think the Taiwanization, particularly the local identity, has been a card played by the ruling party now, the DPP, which is different from the Nationalist Party. So when Tsai Ing-wen was visiting, United States in California, meeting
last week,
McCarthy last week, the former president of Taiwan, Ma Ying-jeou, was visiting China for 10 days or 12 days.
Very smart diplomacy.
And hosting all those things. And at the same time, French President Macron also was in China. And Iranian, Saudi's foreign ministers were in Beijing. And French foreign minister actually met with the Iranian foreign minister in Beijing. So these are the, of course, much broader, aspect of Chinese peacemaking effort, in addition to Russia-Ukraine conflict. Or I would say it also impact on a cross-strait relationship, because the Taiwan people watch that. I follow their commentators, chat rooms. They saw China was pushing for stability, development, for peace.
And with Japan too, the meetings between that were going on.
Yeah, and those conflicts in the Middle East, this is like a centuries old, the intro-civilization or intro-religious conflict between Shiite and the Sunni is as difficult as those between the Catholics and Protestants, during the 30 Years' War. And when people of the same religion kill each other as if no tomorrow, the Chinese have been pushing for those. And this is the same case we talked last time about the Chinese effort to stabilize the Korean Peninsula, right? The six-party talks and China trying to push for it. But even if China is officially an ally of North Korea, but its a real policy or de facto policy has been in the middle and playing this, I would say, honest broker role. Because stability and peace are in the interest of the Chinese people.
Yes.
China has become an enormously conservative player in the world.
Of course.
Because if you want to do business, if you want to make a profit, you should not go to war zones. That's common sense.
And that's where I have a lot of hope, actually, that the conflict between Taiwan and mainland China will not end up the way that the conflict between Russia and Ukraine ended up, because actually there is a very strong common interest between both parties to not go to war. Very, very strong, and both are very capable diplomats. Let's not forget the Republic of China was founded in 1911. Today's Taiwan government, right? They have very, very capable diplomats, and they're both doing that. So does Beijing, and it's a very delicate balance that they are walking, because they have different interests. But I'm hopeful that something will grow out of this inner Chinese understanding of keeping maybe. We don't even need to solve the conflict. We just need to keep it below the level of a war, right? We just need to need a new consensus to continue business.
I agree with you. I think the Chinese wanted and ready to have the long haul, because to keep the status quo. But the problem with is in this age of identity, I'm sorry, I borrowed this liberalist notion. I think has become an extreme ideology now.
Yeah, poisonous.
Essentially, it's divided the people both in the country and divided the countries in the world into us and them. This is a religion, by the way.
Yes.
Domestically, it divided, now in the United States and also in many Western countries, the immigrants from the local people and the gender division. Everything is me, my. I'm identity different from yours.
Yeah.
But it's fundamentally wrong with this approach, because Confucius believed we can be at peace and friends even if we are different. This is I think we talked about that as 和而不同. We unity of differences. This is Confucianism. Western approach is unity of the sameness. If you're my type, we're friends. If you are democracies so we will. Otherwise, you are enemies. There's nothing in between.
But
with us or against us.
But the ridiculous thing is that the idea of democracy itself is that ideal unity of differences, right? You unite different parts under one hat. Supposed to, and in some places it works, in other places it doesn't. Yu-Bin, I need to ask you one last question. And I got this question also in my comments under my last video. And it's the one thing I don't understand about Chinese foreign policy. It's its approach towards the Philippines. I cannot look at what China does without judging that China bullies the Philippines. It just tries to grab as much territory from the Philippines as it can. And it makes no sense to me, because that's obviously a way to push the Philippines straight into the arms of your strategic adversary, right? And why is China still like bullying the Philippines? I don't understand it.
I'm not an expert of the Philippines, but I follow the events. My own understanding of this is, I think this is related to South China Sea issue.
Yes.
And dating back to, I would say, the early days of the Obama administration, when the then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton started the something like a pivot to the east. Yeah. I think when Secretary of State Hillary Clinton joined the ISBN meeting in 2012 or something, and then she published an article on foreign affairs too, talking about the U.S. role in Asia Pacific. So that was the beginning of the elevation of the South China Sea issue. The Chinese regard the South China Sea as it's legitimate. This is like dating back to history. Even the French, the Japanese used to occupy or return to China, and Western powers also recognized that, including the United States, by the way. But the 2016 became a turning point.
Yes.
When the
arbitration case.
The arbitration case, the Chinese rejected. But that was at a crucial point of the code of conduct for South China Sea participants was in progress. That process was seriously interrupted by this arbitration case. The Philippines actually decided to join the United States. So that's really, I think, from Obama, the gradually Obama administration, even including some of the current U.S. officials like 𝗡𝗲𝗂𝘁𝗁, he's on the Tsar of Asia Pacific. He was actually directly involved in the interactions, and at the time was not like this. The United States still recognized, played like a third party, not directly, but 2016 was the beginning. This was followed by Filipino President
Duterte.
I think what's his name?
Duterte.
Duterte, and he kind of like a more balanced and try not to play that card, and rather he would like to go to economic normal relationship. I think that the issue was sort of like handled carefully by both sides.
So
until Marcos came this time, he just made a statement either a day or 2 days ago, talking about. So I believe the two sides now in a rather delicate situation, that President Marcos is on the two boats. He wanted to develop
economic ties,
normal relation with China, but also he and the Filipino military too is a big player, which has a traditional mil-mil relation with the U.S. military. So that's another powerful group in the Filipino domestic politics. Even Marcos' sister opposed President Marcos, the two pros now. It's a very interesting now. I would say it's delicate today or yesterday they started 2 weeks of shoulder-to-shoulder military exercise, which is twice the size of last year's. This is annual. So I was waiting to see how the three sizes would do. But by the way,